everybody for joining. Today's presentation is about uh, information protection using Microsoft 365. Uh, there's been a lot of buzz in this area, and a lot of requirements. I will cover that. And I am Niraj from NetWoven. So what we're going to cover, and thanks to our generous participants, Perficient, AppPoint, Affirma, PointFire, Quiz, and Velo. And I also invite everybody and thank everybody joining at such a difficult time in the world. We appreciate your taking the time. Hope you all are safe and healthy. So we wish you the very best. Just a brief intro on myself. My name is Niraj. I live in San Francisco Bay Area, and I'm the CEO of NetWoven. I've been in this content collaboration security compliance space since 2001. NetWoven is a company of about 150 people, and we focus on all things Microsoft Cloud. And I was also actually involved in the original digital dashboard project at Microsoft that actually formed the basis of SharePoint. So this goes back to 1998 and 1999. So got a lot of gray here, working with in this collaboration security compliance space. So today I will cover the following items. Why information protection, what the content landscape looks like, information protection facets, what a solution framework might be, Microsoft security and compliance products, and then talk about getting the project off the ground, what it takes to get the project off the ground, key considerations for, a project in the security compliance space, and then finally the role of adoption and change management. So it's a pretty involved topic. I'll try to do justice to the topic, in 50 minutes. Okay, so why information protection? I mean, you guys are seeing the geopolitical environment, and basically here's some statistics on why information protection has surfaced as a top need for enterprises. 88% of organizations no longer have confidence to detect and prevent loss of sensitive data. That's according to Forrester research. Greater than 80% of corporate data is dark. It's not classified, protected, or governed. So it kind of travels on its own. The average cost of a data breach is approximately $3.79 million, according to an IBM study. Cyber attacks are being increasingly fueled by geopolitical tensions. According to a PwC survey, 72% of CEOs indicate that their company may be affected by geopolitical cyber activity. So, and data security is also expanding beyond just international regulatory compliance to more intellectual property and proprietary information management. So, I think people are looking at these things. We have to think about data security from all these different facets. And as the world is getting more complex, as there are more hackers, information and intellectual property management is becoming a critical element. So that's why more and more companies are looking at it. So what does the content landscape look like? If you've been in the SharePoint space for a while, pyramids, you've seen pyramids on how the different things unfold. Here, the content landscape looks something like the following. You have down below, you have lots of company data that that can be shared with anyone based on the sole discretion of the employee. The second is internally restricted data. This is data that's vital to be protected from outside, but can be shared internally between employees freely. And then finally, you have these highly confidential data, that if leaked gives an advantage to the competitors. So as you look at the content landscape, you kind of have to think about and break your content down into these buckets and then apply information protection strategy. We've done this for several customers, and we found this framework to be very valuable. Okay, some companies start from the bottom, where they first try to provide a capability to protect all data, and then go after the highly confidential data. Some companies start from the top and then they go to the bottom. So either approach would work. It's just that, whatever approach we take, we have to make sure that we finish the entire pyramid. So what are the information protection facets? If it was that easy, that you could just put in the information protection sort of a label or something to a document, it can be protected, then it would be very simple. But there are many, many things associated with information protection. So let's take a look at what those are. Okay, so as you're developing your information protection strategy, you have to look at many of these items. Like file types. What file types are you trying to protect? Do you have Office files? Do you have software repository files? Do you have, sort of CAD files? Do you have other proprietary files from other applications that you use? So knowing what file types you will be protecting is critical. Then you need to think about what the repositories are. What kinds of repositories are you using? Are you using SharePoint, OneDrive, FileShare? Are you using any software repositories, any CAD repositories, any other, FileNet, Hummingbird? If you're using any of those repositories, you kind of need to know what those repositories are, so you can apply a strategy on files and on repositories. Then you also have to know what applications are you using, because those applications may require some plugins. So you might be using Office applications, in which case Microsoft provides the plugins, or you may be using other applications. So you need to know that. What classification scheme we are going to, how we classify the documents, you have to know that. What data lineage, what is your for historical content and for new content? You have to look at both of these items. Your protection mechanism, what protection policies are required? When you want to protect a document, do you want to prevent copying? Do you want to prevent printing? What do you want to do? These are the typical digital rights management or information rights management strategies that you want to apply. Content ownership. What level of content ownership is required by the content? Who's going to be the author, co-author, or content owner? We have to define that. Auto classification, are there things in the content that could auto classify the content for a specific, label, so that it makes the job of the users easy. And then access control. Since you are using repositories, can you make the job of users easy by working on, by working and assigning group level permissions? So these are all the things that you need to look at, and we kind of put together like a fishbone diagram, so as you're thinking about this, you kind of have to define all of these to say, okay, well, in order to support this, what software platform can you really select and work with? And then this is a longer term effort. This is not a small project. You unfold the capabilities slowly and get people to utilize these capabilities, over a period of time. So it's a pretty involved effort. If you're a small to mid-sized company, you can get this done pretty quickly, since you have a small number of users, but the problems are still the same. You still have to answer the same questions. If you're a large company, you have a much bigger scale to deal with. So essentially, it's about going through these facets and enabling them for protecting information. So what's the solution framework look like? So the solution framework, there's a couple of things here. Down below is the repositories that we just talked about. You may have SharePoint on-prem, online, Exchange, and emails, by the way, are an important element as well. OneDrive, file shares, workstation, you might have software repositories, you might have external repositories. So this is all the repositories that you have to deal with and think about how you're going to solve the problem. Then you have information protection management layer. This is where you have to manage your labels. What are you going to apply to the documents? What are you going to, what keywords you're going to use? What content, how you're going to discover the content, because you probably have lots of documents or and emails in your environment. What reports and dashboards to look at, how you're going to manage the policies. These are all the things to be considered when you are thinking about the information protection management layer. Then you have the presentation layer where you have the client application plugins. So these allow systems to be utilized easily. Native clients, some are native clients, and then there are repository plugins. So you kind of have to have a comprehensive strategy around all of this. And I'll just show an example here. I just came out of this here. If you notice, I've got this label called confidential here. So that's our netwoven label. I could go to home, and then I could click on sensitivity and show my bar. Oops, excuse me. I could go to home, show sensitivity, show the bar, and notice that my company labels are shown here. Okay, this is what information protection is all about: is to be able to apply these labels to the documents, and then work with those. Those labels have certain rules that then apply to the content. It could be a document, could be an email. So in our case, the default is confidential. So all the documents when we start working, it shows up as confidential. So I just thought I'd sort of share that. And that's the client plugin, that actually works to get that information. Okay. Then, so then you've got the administrative layers. So there were some point solutions, that were just focused on information protection management, and they didn't quite integrate with the other aspects of information protection. So as you look to it comprehensively, you have to look at DLP management, group management, user management, device management, reports and dashboards. You kind of have to look at all of these items, to basically develop a comprehensive strategy. You also have to look at your devices, like your Windows devices that that people work with, because not everything can be protected just at the document or at the email level. You might have certain things that need to be protected at your device level. So having that holistic approach is important. So then you have this is just a summary that in the presentation layer plays a critical role in the user adoption. For a successful adoption, appropriate plugins are required. Some plugins are available from Microsoft. If you have certain applications that require other plugins, there are third-party companies that can provide plugins, or you can write your own. So we've done all three of those for customers. Then there is the information protection layer. I talked about that, that capability, all the capabilities that need to be at the information protection layer. Then you have the repositories, and then finally the administration. So that's really your solution framework. Regardless of the software product, you can take this framework and apply it to your information protection strategy. So now let's talk about Microsoft compliance, security and compliance products, right? So you have a choice at this point of time. You can go with best of the breed solutions, or you can go with a comprehensive solution. And Microsoft is one of the vendors that has taken a very interesting, unique approach to solving this problem, and it has all the components that are needed. So the sort of marketing term is Microsoft Information Protection, MIP. And it has several components, like Azure Advanced Threat Protection, Microsoft Cloud App Security. You may have heard the term called MCAS, Office 365 DLP, Office 365 Messaging Encryption called OME, Windows Information Protection, WIP, Office 365 Advanced Data Governance, and there's SharePoint, conditional access. There's a number of these things that are out there, but all of these are integrated, and some of them come with the Microsoft 365 E3, some come with Microsoft 365 E5, and some come with Microsoft E365 E3 plus some security packs. So there's been some licensing change since April. So I would encourage you to look at your different licensing, your license vendor or whoever you purchase licenses from. Netwoven also is a CSP provider, so we also sell licenses to our customers. So now, so you are at a point where you define your architecture. Okay, you've selected your product. Now, how do you deliver on your project, right? What are the phases? What things to do in your project? So, if you look at the information protection life cycle, you kind of have to think through the entire circle here of ranging from classifying the content to labeling the content. The label leads to an encrypting the content. Encryption also applies access control. There's some policy enforcement. And then you also have the capability for document tracking and revoking. So it's a number of these things, it's a whole circle that needs to be implemented to essentially manage your life cycle. Okay. So now, your projects can be delivered in, you can take a sort of a crawl, walk, run approach where you begin your crawling part is understanding your content a bit, enabling the labeling in a limited capacity, working with the users, a limited set of controlled users, and refining your strategy. Okay. Then the walking is then extending that to more users. And then finally running is basically making it available to everybody after you have gotten the kinks out of the system. And then after you have it fully enabled, you can work with it and you can expand your capabilities because it's a living and breathing project. It's not going to be done, it doesn't have a fixed timeline. It will expand. It depends on a number of things that you will be, your business requirements and your needs. And the good news here is that Microsoft is investing heavily here. So, as you get more capabilities on a regular basis. Okay. So next slide. So what's your project approach, right? So typical standard project lifecycle, you start with your initiation, follow that with a discovery, do design, implement, and then post-implement. And it doesn't have to be a waterfall model, although there is some piece of work that'll take some time from a foundational standpoint. But after that, you can actually approach it iteratively. So in the project initiation phase, you can go through finalizing your project goals, identifying and finalizing your stakeholders, your department participants, your change management needs, your current state of governance, review your content strategy, finalize your project timeline, prepare your kickoff communication and do the project kickoff. So there's a number of things you can do in the initiation phase to essentially get your arms around your project, right? Then you get into the discovery phase. So in discovery phase, you have to conduct several interviews with your people that you've identified. You understand the confidentiality rules. You understand the repository landscape. The entire fishbone diagram that I shared earlier, you kind of have to understand all of those things, your file types, your repositories, your user populations, your applications, right? And kind of get a complete landscape of what is it that you're dealing with, right? And that's when you understand your content, right? That what kind of content you have, right? Is it all, what percentage is crown jewel versus what percentage is restricted content versus what percentage is just general content. So you kind of find those out and then you apply, you develop an overall roadmap for your implementation. Okay. And then at the same time, you perform what's called a content discovery. This will help you find what are the keywords that are important to your company. So Microsoft has a product here. There's actually two products. One is called AIP Scanner and the other one is called eDiscovery. And you can utilize both of those products to actually scan content in different repositories and use that for formulating your keyword management strategy. Then you go into the design phase where you are doing an information architecture design, you do security design, taxonomy, design taxonomy is nothing, but association with keywords. You do your label and label policies design. You define your DLP rules, your mail transport rules. Okay, you do your custom development. There may be certain utilities, like when we have worked with customers, we had to develop certain utilities for helping with sharing of documents, or with changing document labels and owners and things like that. So we have a set of utilities that we have worked with customers and built those. And Netphone also has a Govern 365 product. You can find more information at www.govern365.com. It's a product for managing you're governing your Office 365, and we're actually building some hooks into it for managing your security and compliance space as well. Then you also do sensitive info type design. You develop your test environment, and you develop your scanning infrastructure. So those are all the things that are done in the design part, and you're constantly taking input, you're refining your strategy, because you will be overwhelmed with the landscape, because structured data is in a few databases and they are smaller in size, but unstructured content is everywhere, and you would don't be surprised if you find hundreds of terabytes or even petabytes of documents, okay, or files. Okay. Then you go into the implementation phase, you configure your production environment, you deploy the AIP, and by the way, AIP stands for Azure Information Protection. That's part of the Microsoft MIP suite. And that's one thing you're going to find, that if you're new to this space, you will be swimming with acronyms. There is AIP, there's MIP, there is MDATP, there is MCAS. There's a number of these sort of acronyms that you will come across, and Microsoft is also changing their names constantly. So you just have to make sure that you keep your glossary appropriately. Okay. So then you prepare the user acceptance environment, you do the adoption change management, you do the governance, and you essentially take care of the implementation. Okay. And during the implementation, you may be running certain pilots. Okay. Before you do a go live. So that's just part of your learning. You're doing certain pilots, you're taking those learnings, and then you're applying that. And then finally, when you get into post implementation, you got to make sure that your governance, your help desk, and your refinement of a process is all in place. So that's all the things that you'll have to take. In our experience, if it is a large company, actually it depends on the type of company as well, because you could be a medical device company of 500 users, and your problems may be as complicated as a different company of 20,000 users. So I think it really depends on the type of industry. If you're a oil and gas company, or highly intellectual property generating company like oil and gas, or even semiconductor industry, or even medical device, those have higher propensity or higher need for information protection, and whereas the others may have slightly lower needs. So depending on the industry that you are in, some of these projects could take months, or even sometimes the whole enactment could take even years. So then the next slide is around, okay, so now that you've done, what are some of the key considerations? I think there are many key considerations, but kind of consolidated into 4 or 5 things you have to keep in mind. So first is, take a very cautious approach to rolling out labels. In the past, companies, what they have done is they've done a little bit of a rollout to a small pilot user without thinking through the whole thing. In this case, if you do a rollout to a small user base, you may have trouble, in the future. So plan your pilot or proof of concept properly. Okay. Plan sufficient time for adoption change management. It is quite possible that your implementation might take 3 months, but your adoption change management could take another 5 months. So depending on what your needs are and what your company's ability or preparedness for adoption change management is, plan that properly. take a go forward approach first before dealing with historical content. Again, we as a company, we get asked this question quite frequently that, what is, how do we deal with this content, historical documents and files, and how do we deal with go forward content? And our recommendation advice is to look at go forward content, go on the cloud first, establish the foundation framework so you stop the bleeding, and then you go back and apply that to historical content. Then, where feasible, migrate content to the cloud as more innovation is happening. So today you might have SharePoint on-prem, you might have FileNet, Hummingbird, OpenText Live Link, any of these documents management systems. You might even have network file share. I think the key thing is going to be to make sure that you are trying to take your strategy to the cloud for go forward, because that's where most of the innovation is happening. And then when it's feasible, go with a single vendor solution, as integration can be complex. So, there are other companies out there, companies like Vera, Seclor, Digital Guardian, McAfee has certain DLP products. There are other companies that have certain products as well. So you have a choice to make. You can go with the best of the breed. You can try to pick something for your security operations center. You can pick something else for DLP. You can pick something else for digital rights management, and you can pick something else for securing your machine. Or you can go with the Microsoft 365 solution that provides all of these things highly integrated. So there's a trade-off, that you will make. So it's important to sort of think about that as you are selecting your vendor of choice. So the next slide is around, adoption and change management. So it's a very important element, as I was mentioning, that adoption and change management can be bigger than the project, the technical side of the project itself. Okay, so successful adoption requires extensive change management that include training and communication. So we've kind of built a framework, over years of working with customers, and this is not just applicable to security and compliance. You can apply this to migrations. You can apply this to even Power Platform, company-wide rollout. Number of things you can apply it to. Okay, so it basically, you take the business use cases, scenarios, and user personas, you put it all together, and then you address these using 5 things, champion program, communication, training, governance, and support. So there is essentially, there's a number of things that are there in the champion program, just making sure that you've got users, your champions in business communities that are, interacting properly and are carrying your voice to the company, to the business unit is important, because there will be issues, there will be users are going to need help. You just have to make sure that you've got the right help for them. Okay, communication, right? So this is where you create the T minus X plan, right? So where T is the time of the launch, and minus X being the time when you start to prepare. So you prepare your T minus X schedule, right? And then you identify what kind of communication you want to send to the users, right? So it could be an email, it could be, a brown bag, it could be a webinar session, or any of these things. And in this environment that we are in, I think communication becomes even more important, because less and less people are meeting these days. So I think you put your communication plan, then you put your training plan, right? The training plan could be a combination of things. You've got, the webinars. If everything opens up, you may have in-person brown bag sessions as well. You've got short training sessions and you got longer training sessions. So and some are instructor led, some are recorded. So you kind of want to present and have these kinds of training available in different formats. Then is the governance, right? Governance is really important in terms of how are you going to run the service, because there's going to be changes, there's going to be new features, there's going to be enhancements, there's going to be more training. All of these things have to be governed by a governing body. So being able to define that governing body, being able to have the governance, in place is critical for the success of the program. This this whole information protection management can actually have a very far-reaching impact because you are dealing with files now, and if you can't have users access their files, they're essentially shut out from doing their work. So that's the important part to consider here as you're working with with governance. And then finally, support, help desk, right? So you have to make sure that your ITIL process and your help desk is working properly. It's got the right procedures. It's got the right escalations, for making sure that the security and compliance or information protection questions and help is available to users easily. So that's pretty much what I had for the virtual marathon. Thank you for joining us. I'll kind of pause here and take any questions that you might have. And again, I'm Niraj Tenany. I'm with NetWoven, and I'll just go to the first slide here. That's my email ID, tenany@netwoven.com. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions, and I'll pause there and answer any questions that you might have. Anybody have any questions? Okay. Anybody have any questions? Great. Well, if there are no questions, thanks everybody. Thanks for joining, and feel free to reach out to me at ntenany@netwoven.com. Thank you. Bye bye.